Hey guys, it's Nihongo Johnny. Minasan konnichiwa, Nihongo Johnny desu. Welcome to this 31 Days of Halloween Sunday storytime reading. I just wanted to say thank you for hitting subscribe, pressing that like button, and hitting the bell for more notifications. I couldn't do all of this without you guys. Today's story was suggested by Kira Espendez. Hisaruki is a creepy Japanese urban legend about something mysterious that only young children seem to know about. People often hear kids whispering about Hisaruki, but no one seems to know who or what it is. This story combines two obscure urban legends, Hisaruki and Kira-Kira-san, which are essentially the same thing. I'm a teacher, and recently I found a job at a nursery school in Japan. There is a Buddhist temple right beside the school, and right behind both buildings, there is an old graveyard. There is a large metal fence with sharp spikes around the graveyard to prevent any children from going inside and getting lost or causing mischief. After a few days, I've noticed something very strange. There are always insects and lizards impaled on the spikes of the fence. I wondered who would do such a thing, although it was possible that this was the work of some mischievous child at the nursery school. It could have also been done by someone else. The nursery school and the Buddhist temple shared the same entrance, so there were some people coming and going. There were also some elementary school students who often played by the graveyard, so it was often difficult to tell who was doing it. However, one day, a mole was found impaled on the fence. The school principal found it and immediately cleared it away, putting the animal's corpse in a dustbin. A few days later, a cat was impaled on the fence. It was getting worse and worse. The school principal decided that something had to be done. He held a meeting with the teachers and invited some priests from the Buddhist temple to attend as well. "Who is doing this?" he asked. "What should I do to stop it?" There was a long discussion, but nobody seemed to know any solutions. After almost an hour, we still didn't know who was doing it or how to stop it from happening again. A few days later, a rabbit was found impaled on the fence. It wasn't just any rabbit. The pet rabbit was from the nursery school. We kept it in a cage in one of the classrooms, and the children were allowed to feed it. I found it in the morning when I arrived at work. When I spoke to one of the Buddhist priests, he told me that one of them had been clearing the weeds in the graveyard earlier that morning, and the dead rabbit hadn't been there. That meant that the culprit had to have impaled the rabbit on the fence before I arrived. One of the children in my class had arrived early from school that morning, so I took him aside and asked him if he had seen anything. The child only said one word: Hisaruki. Hisaruki? I asked him over and over, but it seemed like the boy couldn't explain what he meant, and he just covered his eyes with his hands and kept shaking his head, repeating, Hisaruki, Hisaruki, Hisaruki. Later on, I asked the other children about Hisaruki. Every child in the class knew the name, but none of them could explain who or what Hisaruki was. It was very frustrating. There was also something else that struck me as weird. The children knew that the pet rabbit had been killed, but none of them seemed to be upset about it. It was as if they just had accepted it. I had the strangest feeling that they might have been expecting it to happen. At the end of the day, the children's parents came to pick them up. I asked the parents if they have ever heard the name Hisaruki, but none of them remembered their children ever mentioning it. I determined that it wasn't a character from a TV show or a book either. It was a complete mystery. As I was getting ready to leave, one of the other teachers stopped me. "I'm sure I saw a picture with that name on it," she said. She told me that years ago she had seen a picture drawn by a child in her class, a little boy to be exact, and she was sure that the name on it written below was Hisaruki. "What happened to that boy?" I asked. "He left," she replied, "but I remember that the circumstances of him leaving were quite strange." She told me that the boy had been absent from school for a week. Then, one morning, his parents turned up to collect his school books. They seemed to be in a hurry and didn't want to talk. All they would say is that their son had been in an accident and they were going to move to another city. But they refused to elaborate any further. The teacher gave them the books, and as they were leaving, she noticed that their son was sitting in the back of the car. He was wearing eye patches, she said. Not just one eye patch, but 2 eye patches. That was all she could tell me. She did not know what happened to the boy after that. His parents drove off and she never saw him again. The next morning, when I arrived at school, the principal had told me that he had found a chicken impaled on the fence. I shook my head in disbelief. It seemed as if this was never going to stop. Later that day, during the lunch break, the children were playing in the yard. It was my turn to supervise them. I noticed that one boy, who was close to the fence, suddenly stopped in his tracks and looked up at the sky. "It's Hisaruki," he said. The message was passed from child to child around the playground, like a game of Chinese whispers. "Hisaruki, Hisaruki, Hisaruki." I watched in disbelief, one by one, as the children stopped playing and covered their eyes with their hands. Some of them were standing there, and others were crouching, but all of them were motionless. It was a bright and sunny afternoon, but the uneasy silence sent a chill down my spine. I knelt down at the boy nearest to me and said, "I don't see anything. Who is Hisaruki?" The boy did not answer me, so I pulled his hands away from his eyes. "I want to know," I said sternly. "Who is Hisaruki?" "I don't know," the boy muttered. He tried to cover his eyes again. I grabbed his wrists and stopped him. "Tell me," I demanded, "who is Hisaruki?" The boy stuck out his index fingers on both of his hands and raised them up to the front of my face. It took me by surprise, but luckily I was able to move my head and dodge his attack. Before I had a chance to react, the boy broke free from my grasp and started jabbing his fingers into his own eyes. I wrestled him to the ground and desperately tried to stop him from poking his own eyes out. "Someone help me!" I screamed. One of the other teachers came running over, and together we managed to subdue the boy. We took him to the hospital, and the doctors managed to save his eyes. After that, the animal stopped appearing on the spikes of the iron fence. None of the children mentioned Hisaruki. Now and then, I would see them covering their eyes, and when they were playing outside on the playground, I would just ignore it. Occasionally, I would find small lizards and insects impaled on the iron fence, but I chose to ignore that as well. I never questioned any of the children about Hisaruki again. There are some things you just don't want to know. That was a pretty disturbing story. I'm glad it was creepy enough, but not overly gory. What did you guys think of this story? Please let me know in the comments below. And if you guys have any stories you'd like to hear in the future, please let me know. I'm always happy to hear them. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next video.